You are listening to Specifically for Seniors, a podcast designed for a vibrant and diverse senior community. I'm your host, Dr. Larry Barsh. Join me and a lineup of experts as we discuss a wide variety of topics that will empower, inform, entertain, and inspire as we celebrate the richness and wisdom of this incredible stage of life. Dictators hate a free press. Viktor Orban in Hungary built his own media universe while simultaneously dismantling the free press. The Nazis during World War II smashed printing presses of opposition newspapers. One of Donald Trump's first actions was to dictate who would cover him in the White House and on Air Force One. He refused to allow the Associated Press admittance to press briefings. Social media and press giants like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk control, or rather eliminate control over truthfulness of content placed on Facebook and X. Jeff Bezos, owner of the Washington Post, stated he will not print opinions that oppose his subservience to Donald Trump. My guest today on Specifically for Seniors is Rebecca Hamilton. Rebecca is a professor of law at American University, Washington College of Law. Her research and teaching focus is on national security law, technology, international law, and criminal law. Her scholarship draws on her experience in the prosecution of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court, as well as her journalism background, including work in conflict zones as a foreign correspondent for Washington Post. She's the author of Fighting for Darfur, Public Action and the Struggle to Stop Genocide, which analyzes citizen activism and the effort to stop mass atrocities. Welcome to Specifically for Seniors, Beck.
Thank you, Larry. It's a pleasure to join you.
Rebecca, can we start right at the beginning with the issues surrounding a free press? The First Amendment to the Constitution guarantees several fundamental rights, including freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. Donald Trump seems to be trampling all of these freedoms, not only by his words, but also by executive actions. Students who have voiced opposition to various policies at universities have been taken into custody by masked federal agents and have had visas rescinded. Voice of America has been shuttered. The Education Department has been gutted. Funding of universities has been canceled, and NPR and PBS are under threat. Trump is violating a basic premise of the Constitution he swore to uphold. How could this happen?
That is that is a question that I think the answer goes to all of us, in the sense that Donald Trump, candidate Trump, and previously during his first term, President Trump, has always been clear about his total disrespect for constitutional norms that have been upheld over the course of decades. And part of it is, I think, there was a unwillingness to really take him seriously at his word when he said that he was going to do these things that he has gone ahead and done. And part of it is I think as Americans, we are often accustomed to thinking that surely these horrors that we see in autocratic societies abroad can't happen here. that somehow we're immune to this, because we have this storied constitution and history, and we should be clear when we say that that is a story that has only ever been upheld for some portions of American society. But nonetheless, I think the foundational narrative of American exceptionalism is very deeply ingrained, and it has made it hard, I think, for a lot of the public to really absorb the threat that this man poses to a constitutional democracy, and to really understand that this is real. This is actually happening now. Democracy is under threat, and this is the moment that if we're going to fight for democracy, it has to happen now.
And how not only that of Trump's actions, but how dangerous is the control of media ownership by a few select billionaires? Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg, Musk.
Mm. Very dangerous. And I think, as your introduction sort of spoke to, there is a fundamental connection between a free press and the public getting access to information about what their government is doing and democracy. And Donald Trump is not an idiot about that, right? He understands that the way that people get their information is deeply connected to the decisions that they make about their government. And so, anytime that you have this narrowing of space for free and independent reporting about government action, then you are directly attacking the basis for democratic decision making. So I think it's very troubling, and this didn't start with this Trump administration. It didn't even start with the first Trump administration. There has, over the past 20 years, been a consolidation of media outlets in the hands of a comparatively few owners. The move to digital news was deeply disruptive for the media industry, and we're still seeing the ways that that is playing out. Some of it has been positive, a lot of it has been negative, but it has reshaped the entire ecosystem for how we get information. And the vulnerabilities that it has created, I think we are now seeing the democratic impact of those vulnerabilities, and of this shrinking of the information space.
And that's amplified by the fact that many people get all their news from social media.
Yes, and the surveys that we've seen on this are really pretty pretty terrifying for those of us that grew up in a world where that was not the case. It's certainly required a revisiting of assumptions about the way that people get news. Um, Again, there are some pluses and some minuses of that, but one of the deep minuses is that we risk just hearing from the viewpoint of people that we already agree with. And that is a key risk for a democracy, because in order to make good decisions in a democracy, we need to be able to understand what is the situation for people across all of society. And if we are only hearing one perspective or one viewpoint, even if that viewpoint is accurate, right? Now, there are, of course, a lot of instances of social media where whatever viewpoint you're being given is based on information that is not accurate. And so that further compounds the problem.
Yeah, and Trump has frequently denounced the press as fake news, calling for Comcast to be investigated for treason. Journalists are facing threats to their safety, to their physical safety. All of this making independent reporting harder, while extolling the virtues of those who cooperate with him. This is not a free press.
Right. And this is these systemic trends that we're seeing are really, really concerning, because when you make it that difficult and ultimately that dangerous for journalists to report in a free and fair manner, then the harms extend to the entirety of the population. That is information that the public is not getting, that the public needs in order to make good decisions about the state of the society that they live in. And, Donald Trump is an interesting character in the sense that he has very congenial relationships with a number of journalists, but he sees them simply as sort of his personal PR machine. So you are in his circle and liked by him if you are espousing his views and the views that align with his administration. But you've seen the way he just berates journalists in public who dare to question the ways that he is putting state power to use. So there's this fundamental failure to recognize that the very point of a free press is to have people in the room when not all of us as members of the public can be in that room, that we have people in the room on our behalf who can ask the hard questions about why state power is being used in a particular way. But he sees that as an attack on him, and then we get all that rhetoric about the press being enemies of the people and fake news and so on.
Except for the press that is on his side, that talks about his policies as being the only ones that are valid.
Right. And you see this inclination towards wanting to give special access to those that support his views, but it's all part of the same package of, I think, a fundamental lack of respect for the role that a free press plays in a democratic society.
And in addition, he's used the power of government to interfere with public access to the news. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has ousted press access to the Pentagon. The NTSB has been forced to use, and this really concerns me, to use X to inform the public about airline crashes. Social Security seems to have to report actions on X, threatening NPR and PBS with funding cuts, accusing 60 Minutes of partisan and unlawful acts of voter interference. How does it come about that government agencies can be forced to make critical announcements on a private social media entity?
So there's a few different things going on here to unpack. And I should say the National Transportation Board story was one where they were putting out information on X in a moment where they were sort of overwhelmed. There were those multiple plane crashes at once. And that doesn't seem to be sort of going to be standard practice across the board for them. So I'm less worried about that particular case. I think that was just a moment in time, and they are continuing to work hard to get information out through all channels. But we have subsequently seen in other areas this constricting of the channels through which the public can get information. And as you said, that's been a real problem in relation to Social Security. This shutting off of telephone access, which is a huge problem for people that don't have internet access. So there's this general kind of restriction of channels of access. And I think connected to that is also we're seeing reduction in federal workforce, including those that are responsible for public record keeping, for responding to Freedom of Information Act requests. So you can look at any one of these pieces in isolation, and it maybe doesn't seem like such a big deal, or it was momentary and it seems like it wouldn't be part of a trend. But when you put all those pieces together, I do think we're seeing an overall narrowing of the places from which, or the entry points for the public regarding information about what our government is doing. And the attacks on the public broadcasting, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, are also a part of that. The work that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting does ensures that a huge number of people in the American public get access to quality free media.
And the shuttering of Voice of America, which I guess has been reversed, uh, that gives an impression of what's going on in America to the rest of the world.
Well, it's not I mean, so yeah, it's not just about Voice of America, and that has been effectively disbanded, but it's also other outlets or sources for global journalism, like Radio Free Asia. So I think it comes down to, again, this deep dislike and distrust of free and fair reporting. So we're not only seeing that being squeezed out in the domestic setting, but also the role that the US used to play in supporting free and fair journalism globally. And in particular, in countries that don't have their own tradition of a free press, these have been lifelines in terms of sources of information. But again, these are being shuttered.
How do nonprofits and closing down of nonprofits like universities and other nonprofits that criticize the government, uh, how does that affect uh, what's going on?
So the government isn't closing them down, but it's certainly making a lot of organizations that are responsible for a whole lot of civic life in the United States very difficult to operate. And these executive orders that have attacked the ability of different educational institutions, for example, to survive the threats to federal funding that we've seen at Columbia University, at Harvard University, on the basis of whether or not they're willing to follow these unlawful, truly unlawful demands that the Trump administration is making of them. And I think the Columbia versus Harvard responses are really interesting as a sort of mini case study. Columbia capitulated very early to the demands that the Trump administration was making. Harvard initially began to look like it was heading in the same direction, but then changed course and has come out very strongly against the demands that the Trump administration was making that would have completely undercut the mission of the university. And so we're going to see that play out, these different approaches. It seems very clear to me, and I think to anyone that has sort of worked or lived in an autocratic or repressive regime, that trying to comply or appease or capitulate to the demands of such an administration doesn't protect you in the long term, because they can always change the rules of the game, and maybe you agree to demand X on day one, but on day 10 they say, well, that's no longer enough, and we want you to do something else. So I think it's going to come out better for Harvard than Columbia on this score, although it is looking like Columbia is starting to rethink the initial strategy it took. So we'll see.
How is Harvard going to influence the response of all the other universities?
Mm. So Harvard's important in this, in the sense that, huge endowment beyond what most colleges and universities could ever dream of. And so there's been a sense of, if Harvard can't stand up to this administration, then who can? But when Harvard does, I think there's this saying that I think is true and important in this moment, that courage is contagious. And when leaders in a field stand up and say it is possible to resist this, there is another pathway, you don't have to capitulate, then it opens up the range of options for everybody else. And I think in all of this, and this sort of goes back a little bit to what I was saying about just habits that many parts of American society have gotten into. Um, we haven't been, or again, I should say, significant parts of US society haven't been great at thinking and acting collectively. Now, obviously, there are many counterpoints to that, and you can think of labor unions, and you can think of civil rights activists. So there are places within our society that we can look to for how to do this well, how to resist the encroachment on our rights. But all of it requires the ability to think and act collectively, because part of what authoritarian regimes do is they divide and conquer, and that's how they sustain themselves in power. But the power of collective action is a very strong counterweight to that.
What what scares an autocratic regime, as seen in Trump's presidency as well, with certain aspects of public and university education? Uh, there seems to be a fear of giving people the right not only to a free press, but the right to uh, an education that is not government controlled.
So I think for any authoritarian regime, it is about controlling information and knowledge, so that you constrain people's understanding of their reality. And institutions of higher education have always been places of dissent and contrary views and resistance, and often that is really annoying to whoever is in power. I don't think that is unique to authoritarian regimes. But what is true about authoritarian regimes is that uh, control of information and knowledge is really central, and so any sites or institutions that they can't control are threatening.
And this is even starting in grammar school, high school educations with control of the books that kids can read.
Yes, and again, this predates, remember, this Trump administration, and this has been one of those sort of fissure points in U.S. society for a while now. This question of who gets to control what it is that our children read, and there are, good faith debates on either side of that. But I think the issue comes when you are using state power to make these determinations.
This was especially prevalent in Florida, where the librarians would be given orders as to which books could be displayed or available.
Yeah, I
There-
know. I mean, yes, I
There's
don't know that.
just, uh,
Um, yeah, and so librarians are another. If you're looking to control sites of information, librarians are another sort of population that can be threatening to that, because they're very sort of um, uh, key to their profession is sharing and making available access to a range of knowledge.
freedom of speech in the legal profession is somewhat limited uh, anyhow by confidentiality. Uh, but what's the story with the attempts to subjugate law firms? Is this a quest for power, or is it part of an attempt to continue to control possible antagonistic speech in the same way as controlling the press?
So I don't see the attacks on law firms as a freedom of speech issue. I do think it is about um, sort of pushing back against sites of resistance to whatever the administration's particular goals are, right? Because um, if you are going to, if any member of the public is going to um, use the courts to push back against unlawful actions against them or the institutions that they belong to, they need lawyers to represent them. And it seems to be that the attacks on law firms are based around the idea that law firms should somehow only work for or primarily work for people or companies or organizations that align with this administration's agenda, and that the minute that a law firm is representing an interest that is opposed to the Trump administration's agenda, then that is somehow um, unacceptable and they need to be targeted. So that seems to be what's going on there.
With all of the press issues, what's the future of journalism in both print and digital media?
I have a lot of faith in journalists. They're, typically a pretty courageous bunch, and you don't go into journalism to make a lot of money. You do it because you really care about reporting and figuring out um, what what is happening with different sources of power quite often. So I think it's too soon to make any predictions. Certainly, journalism is under attack. There are going to be journalists who are better and worse positioned to be able to respond to that. One of the things that is true is that journalists working for news organizations that have big corporate owners um, also have legal departments that can respond to attacks on journalists, and that's not going to be the case for journalists that are part of smaller or non-profit outfits. At the same time, some of those independent journalists can get information out more quickly and effectively. So it's a real, I think that entire media ecosystem is in flux right now. Um, but I wouldn't give up on journalists too quickly.
How should young journalists react to this? Kids who are just going into the field.
I mean, I say we need you. We need more of you, and it's a wonderful profession to engage in. And there are lots of older journalists that are very keen to mentor the next generation about what it means to uphold the obligations of free and fair reporting. And like every new generation, they'll bring creativity and different experiments and mechanisms for telling news stories in a way that really captures the imagination of people, and what journalism looks like tomorrow is not going to be the same as it looks like 20 years ago, and that's all for the good. But I think that what is incumbent on all of us is to make sure that space is preserved for that to happen. And that means thinking about choices we're making, for example, with funding journalism. Not everybody is in a position to pay for their news. But when you think of all the things that we pay for in this society, I mean, Americans pay for everything, right? Just there's very little that is freely provided, and yet for the most part, we've got into the habit of not paying for journalism. That probably needs to change if we want to move away from this system of having just a few publications with big corporate owners. We've got into that position because we haven't been paying for journalism.
Are we facing a constitutional crisis?
We're in it. We're not facing it. We are in it right now. And so far we're seeing the courts doing overall a really good job of their role, pushing back against constitutional violations. And I think we're in this moment now where the question is, to what extent will this administration um, respond appropriately to the courts? But I think there should be no question that the crisis is here right now.
A democracy depends on access to factual information from a free press, to a difference of opinions expressed as opinions, and a free flow of ideas. Any effort to undermine this freedom by the government is antithetical to our Constitution. Ultimately, we in the public must assume some degree of control. How do we do it? What are the next steps?
So, the first message that I want to convey in this moment is that we're not powerless. I think there is uh, an, a sort of a sense right now of all this is unfolding sort of in Washington, like at a remove from real people's lives. But everything that is happening is deeply connected to our lives ultimately. And so while there's an instinct to say, well, I'll just stay in my own little bubble, right here in my neighborhood, everything seems okay for now. And so I'll just focus my energy on living my private life in the here and now. That way of thinking is ultimately what give leads to ceding our rights. And I think instead we need to understand that all of these things that we're hearing reported in the news, whether now or in 2 years' time, will have a very direct impact on our ability to live our lives freely. And what is also pretty clear to me is that we could be that if the trajectory continues the way that the initial, what are we at now, 3 months, 4 months of this administration has been going, then we could be more free now than we're going to be in another 6 months' time. And so it's incumbent upon us, I think, to sort of seize this moment to be raising our voices. And that's going to look different for everybody. Everyone is situated differently in terms of what they have the ability to do, what level of risk they're able to take on. It matters when people are willing to turn out and protest. It matters when you call your representative and your member of Congress and say that you're engaged and that you care. I think one of the terrifying things, frankly, in recent months has been that we've got an administration that is very committed to the strength of executive power, the power of the presidency. We have a system of government that depends on the separation of powers and there being a check on that presidency. Courts seem to be trying to do their role, but Congress feels like it's been very, very absent. Now, obviously, there are individuals that have been rising to the occasion in Congress. And Cory Booker, for example, has been extraordinary on that front. But overall, I think we're going to look back on the first sort of 6 months of this administration and wonder why overall Congress hadn't moved onto a footing that really understood the moment of emergency that we're in. But remember, Congress too doesn't work in a vacuum, and that's why I say it's on all of us. Congress needs to hear from its constituents, and just for all of those representatives to be reminded that we're paying attention. And some of the best examples we've seen of that have been in the town halls that have been happening around the country, where individual voters have been saying, this is not okay, what you're doing in our name. And pushing back. So those are the sites of resistance that I think are going to be sources of hope going forward. And again, there are so many groups and populations in this country that have always been having to work collectively in order to get their rights upheld. And it is those communities, the most marginalized of communities in our society, that I think we need to look to for their wisdom and guidance in this moment about how to do this.
How do we break through to that other 49% and get them to listen to the arguments on the other side?
So there's no one answer to that, right? But I think again, all of us are part of a family or a community or a network where we encounter people that are feel very differently than, for example, the way I do about this administration. And I think recognizing that the people who see Trump as a necessary corrective for this country are themselves, they're not a monolith, and they're individuals, they're people we know, they're people that are on our sports teams, or our in our kids schools, or um, and having one-on-one conversations with them rather than speaking about them as this sort of monolith, I think is empowering, because when you say, oh, there's a 49% out there, how do we get to them, no one individual feels like they can take that on. But when you have the conversation with your grandchild or nephew or a cousin, that doesn't think that there's any problem with the direction that this country is going right now, you're going to be much more compelling to them, because you have a relationship with them. And it's a lot of those one-on-one private conversations that I think need to be happening. We need to get better at talking to each other.
I'm just thinking about the resistance that comes in when you try to have a quiet, composed discussion with someone whose views are totally different than yours. And it becomes more of an argument than a discussion.
So I'm not suggesting it's easy, and if it was easy, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in now. I think people that do work on this, and there's a whole sort of body of research on how to have these conversations. Um, it's about not coming into the conversation with the goal of convincing the other side that they're wrong and that you're right. Any of us, when we are faced with someone who is committed to showing us how wrong we are, reacts defensively. But approaching those conversations with empathy and trying to listen, And it's not a one-off process. It is a long-term project. But again, we seem to have gotten ourselves into this state as a society, and we're seeing the consequences of it. And so, yes, it's going to be a hard and long road back to the point where we have a shared understanding, at least of reality. And this is why the press piece is so important, because what a well-functioning free press can do is convey this accurately shared sense of reality among the society, so that we're all working off the same set of facts when we're making decisions about who should be our representatives.
Because we no longer seem to be a centrist community with people to the left of center and to the right of center. On both sides, we seem to be in the extremes.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of, I don't have the polling on this, right? I think there's probably a lot of people who would like to inhabit a center, and maybe their voices are not what is getting amplified on social media.
Any closing thoughts?
I guess the key thing that I'm trying to convey in all the conversations that I'm having with a lot of different people at the moment is that each of us, have the power to influence the trajectory that this country is taking. And the minute that we forget that and imagine that it's somebody else who can take this on, and that if we just sort of focus on ourselves and our own lives, that somehow magically this will be fixed, that is only heading us in a negative direction. And so, what exactly that looks like is going to be different for every individual. We're all placed in different circumstances. We all have different skills and access to different communities. But I think that the question for each of us to ask ourselves is, given the particular skills or connections or background that we have, what is it that I myself can contribute in this moment? If I want to ensure that the country that I am part of is one that I want my children and grandchildren to inherit, and to be very wary of that. I think sort of pernicious reflex that can be so common, of thinking that the worst of things couldn't happen here, it's something that happens elsewhere. um, it can happen here, and we need to fight for the rights that we believe in.
Do we basically all want the same thing? The
I
right to
think
raise families, to live in peace, to explore our potentials.
yes. So I think it is true. It has always been true, and we forget it too often. It sounds trite, but that idea that what unites us is greater than what separates us. And talk to anyone who is raising a child, who has grandchildren. The things that they want for them are fundamentally more similar than they are disparate. And so uh, that's why I think there is more commonality there than perhaps we see through looking at social media. The algorithms on social media are um, constructed in order to amplify difference. Uh, so when we rely on social media for reporting, we see more of the differences than we see of the similarities. But if you actually get out into your neighborhood and talk to the people next door, and talk to the people at the shops and the school and the park, you recognize how much commonality there is.
on either side of the political distinctions between us, do any of us really want to live under an autocratic, dictatorial regime?
No one. No one ever says that's their goal in life. So there's a unification of purpose once we all have a shared understanding of that being the risk. And I think that's the challenge right now. And this is why the free press conversation is so important. Because if you don't understand that the Constitution is under attack, then you don't see that that's the risk that we're facing.
And that may be the common point where we all can disagree, where we all can agree.
Indeed.
Beck, thank you so much. This has been fascinating.
It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
It's been great. Thanks for coming on specifically for seniors.
Thank you for hosting.
If you found this podcast interesting, fun, or helpful, tell your friends and family, and click on the follow or subscribe button. We'll let you know when new episodes are available. You've been listening to Specifically for Seniors. We'll talk more next time. Stay connected.